Baldwin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary McMahon, during your confirmation hearing, when asked about spending appropriated funding, you said, quote, "If they have been appropriated by Congress, those funds should be disseminated," close quote. You also said that eliminating the department is not about cutting federal funding for schools. Now we have a budget request that significantly cuts funding for public schools, students, and educators. Now, a few days ago, the OMB director said that impoundment is still on the table, threatening to take funding away this year. And we have your spending plan for this year that still leaves more than $8 billion, in your own words, unallocated. Not spending these funds is the administration making a decision not to invest in our children, and that decision has real consequences. What you consider unallocated for this year includes $1.3 billion for before and after school programs, which supports programs for thousands of students in Wisconsin in approximately 150 locations throughout the state, and over $2 billion to support effective teachers, of which an estimated $23 million would provide evidence-based professional learning for educators and help address gaps in access to effective teachers in Wisconsin. Are you going to allocate all of the funding Congress appropriated for students and schools in Wisconsin and across the country this year?
Well, Senator Baldwin, thank you very much for that question, and I understand your concerns. What we have done in putting forward our operating plan, the first operating plan to show where we were making allocations, and then followed up with the second operating plan.
This isn't a nuanced question. Congress passed a law appropriating this funding. You said in your confirmation hearing that you would spend funding Congress appropriated. If the answer isn't simply yes, based on all of the evidence before us, that leads me to believe that you are planning to withhold funding and shortchange schools, students, and families across America.
Well, we're going to continue to look at the allocations, and we'd like to work with you as we continue to evaluate those programs.
We passed a continuing resolution that appropriated funding, and you said earlier that you were going to spend it as appropriated as is signed into law. So I'm going to move on. Secretary McMahon, when we met before your confirmation hearing, you told me that our students' mental health was a priority for you. Yet you recently decided to discontinue mental health grants that Congress authorized and funded on a bipartisan basis because you determined, quote, they were not in the best interest of the federal government, close quote, which makes me wonder what changed since our conversation. Your operating plan for fiscal year 2025 describes this funding as unallocated this year. Your budget request for next year proposes eliminating this funding. Secretary McMahon, do you believe increasing access to mental health supports for students is not in the best interests of the federal government?
We're not looking to eliminate this funding. We are simply continuing the funding, but will allow the states to rebid on the competitive grant basis, and we're evaluating those programs across states. I think that a governor in a state or the local superintendent or the health care professionals that are working in that state have the best opportunity in looking at what is happening in their areas to make those requests for those grants. And so that's what we're looking at.
Secretary McMahon, the grant that you discontinued for the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction was being used to expand access to mental health care for students. We're talking about more counselors and mental health professionals in schools. Why did you cut off funding for this grant and take away this help for Wisconsin students and schools?
Well, because I think we have to look at it across the board, Senator, and the goal really is to make sure that the money is being spent in the best and the best places
What
for
about
the best
training
professionals.
new school psychologists, like what you chose to discontinue at Alverno College in Wisconsin? Do you think that's also not in the best interest of the federal government?
I believe there are a lot of programs that are in the best interest of the government, but the states and the local areas, I think, are the best place where we need to concentrate, for these particular programs.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, I'm going to add my voice of concern with Senator Collins, and you and I have talked about this on the zeroing out, the elimination of the TRIO and Gear Up.
Very much. Welcome, Madam Secretary. And I'm not a great mathematician, but I think you were talking about $1 trillion. I believe 1.5 billion times 10 is $15 billion. That's a little bit off from $1 trillion. But
I think the budget cut's $1.2 billion for TRIO.
well, 1.2, that would be $12 billion, not $1 trillion.
Okay.
Fine. Why aren't you recommending an audit for the TRIO program, if that's what the problem is?
I'm not allowed to audit it.
Oh, legislatively, you could propose that.
We could propose it, which is what I had said at the very beginning. I would look
Why-
forward.
You're not
I would look
proposing
forward.
it. You're not proposing the audit. You're proposing to essentially constrain the program, put it into a block grant, and without any request for audit language, which would come from the United States Senate.
Well, that's exactly what I would request.
Well, why don't
If
you
the
request
program
it,
goes
Madam
first.
Secretary?
Yes, I would like to do that.
Well-
If Congress is going to appropriate, again, money for the TRIO programs, then I would like to work with Congress, and part of that would be auditing.
Well-
We've found that about 92% of the TRIO funds go to the same people all of the time, the same institutions.
That could indeed imply an audit necessary, but it doesn't validate the budgetary approach you're taking. You're taking basically many programs, combining them into from $8 billion total to $2 billion to a block grant. Now, in Washington, the block grant is the slow path to extinction, because next year the request will be for probably $8 billion. And 4 or 5 years from now, when the request is still $8 billion, the cost will far exceed that. That's sort of budgeting 101. So you're really out to eliminate these programs, I think, not to make them more efficient.
That's not true. I disagree with that.
Well-
There are some budget cuts, but what we're asking for is a simplified funding measure, which will be a single grant funding to the states for them to use in the best way possible to make sure their education is working better.
No, I think
However, the other side of that, if I may, sir, is that we are reducing the regulatory burden. Do you know that 47 cents of every dollar that goes into a school, teachers spend complying with regulations? So if we can take away that regulatory burden, yes, while there are some cuts in the cost of funding, we still give the opportunity to have more dollars because we're reducing the regulatory
But
burden.
let me understand this. You're very enthusiastic about an audit, but the regulatory burden is so crippling. An audit would impose more requirements on the schools. I just think you're coming and going, and we're not making progress. The cut to these programs is profound, $6 billion. And the states are not going to step up and say, we can do this. I'll tell you why. Because if this budget passed, every state in this country is going to make a difficult decision. Do I save my health care system, or do I save my public education system? Many of them can't do both. And this is will be a profound shock to the education systems around the country. In 1 year, a loss of these funds, and to the students that need it.
Well, what we have found,
Have
sir,
you ever taken public assistance?
have I ever taken public assistance? No, sir.
No? Not at all?
No, sir.
Well, many people do. And they need that support to get ahead. And education is a key mechanism to go ahead. I'm over my, no, I still have some time. To get ahead, and it's remarkable. I think, this all sort of started with the GI Bill, when a generation of Americans got to education who never could get before. And then Senator Pell, my colleague, sort of saw that model and increased it. By the way, you're also decreasing the Pell Grants. you're shrinking educational opportunity in the United States for a whole generation and more, and also shrinking our ability to compete internationally and globally, because I don't think the Chinese will slack off in their investments in education.
Senator, I appreciate your comments. However, we have spent $3 trillion since 1980 on education in our country when this department was set up, and our scores have continued to go down. We are not doing something right. And your numbers are a little bit off on a number. We're going to have about, it's still a cut, but it's about a $4.5 billion cut, not $8 billion cut.
Well, it's a significant cut, and
to be more responsible.
to be more responsible, your responsibility amounts to just surrendering.
Sorry, sir?
Surrendering. We have this crisis in education and literacy, all these factors. What we're going to do is pull back, let the states do it.
No, we'll spend it more responsibly.
I doubt it very seriously. So,
Let's hope we do.
well, hope, as someone said, is not a plan. Thank you.
All right, Senator Britt.
Madam Secretary, thank you so much for being here today. I want to start